Okay, it's recording.
Great, thank you.
Okay, well, welcome to OSEHRA VA PALS working group for, April 11th already, 2018. And here's your usual notice that we are recording this. And if you look at the blog on our OSEHRA blog, then you will see where to find the recordings if you want to see them. Other than that, I think we can dive right in. So I think, George, were you going to demo?
Did we have an agenda? We
did.
We talked about having an agenda.
Yeah. Oh, here it is. Okay, we wanted to talk about security and broker protocols and organizing our repository. And we also wanted to talk some about which reports LCAP uses. So I don't think we decided on an order.
No, but we could use the order you just said.
Okay. Then who wants to talk about security? Because I don't know about that one.
Yeah, there were a couple issues we were interested in talking with Joel about. One is just when you're creating applications, access a Vista system remotely, other than prompting for access and verify code, what is the VA requiring these days? Like, are there special requirements if it involves the web? You know, I know that Joel was working on the infrastructure before he retired, and probably has the clearest picture of that of any of us.
Now, are you talking about an individual, or are you talking about between systems?
We would need to know the answer to both things.
Okay, individuals these days are required to use a PIV card. And so what they do is they sign on the PIV card and enter in their 6-digit ID to match the PIV card, and they have access.
And does that give them access to the workstation specifically?
Basically, well, I am not sure if it's matched to workstation or just the card, but I think it moves from, the laptop I have, it knows my ID and it knows my card numbers. It knows some other people's card numbers too. So it may be, that it has to be entered initially on the system by the IT people. I'm not sure.
Right. So it might be independent of the specific workstation, but is it whichever workstation you're on, is it the workstation that is locked until you enter your PIV card and ID, or is it something else?
Yeah, they have to have a card reader, and they slide the card in or whatever. If you're coming in from outside, the instant you pull that card out, it breaks the connection.
Right. Okay. Okay. So if it's at the workstation level, then most likely for this particular project, we won't have to write anything to deal with the card. We can assume, as long as it stays inside the firewall and it's only being used by VA employees on VA workstations, that they've dealt with the PIV card and 6-digit ID.
Yes.
So that's good. Okay.
I mean, it's in other words, just like any other infrastructure, as long as the program is using the individual from the VA file, the new user file, 200, then once they've signed in, they're signed in.
Right.
And so it depends upon what options and keys they're given.
So let me just check this and make sure I'm following this part too. So the PIV card gets them into the workstation, but it does not sign them into the Vista environment. They still have to enter an access and verify code?
No, it signs them into the Vista environment.
Oh, that's the thing that was missing.
No, that's what I mean. It's once you've done that, you're inside, and then all you need are your options and keys and things like that.
So for that to work, then our software will have to do something. Because we'll have to pick up the token and know who they are.
No. Why?
So there's a possibility, we're writing our software so that it's going to operate in two different modes. In one mode, it is installed inside the Vista environment and runs with Vista on the same server in the same MUMPS environment. In the other mode, which we might be required to do by certain people in OIT who think life would be simpler if Vista just never improved from here on out because they're counting on Cerner, they might ban us from making any changes to the Vista environment. And if they do that, then we'd have to run our software on a standalone Vista server that functions as a separate VA PALS server. And so it's not currently plugged into whatever the current Vista server is plugged into, so it's not going to know about it.
Somebody's making noises.
Ah.
Oh, they stopped.
Okay. So our
other than Rick talking, I meant, yes.
Well, that's always noisy. So our server won't know about the PIV card and the 6-digit ID because it's a separate server from the Vista server. We won't know which user they are.
I'm trying to figure out. I think that even if they give you a separate server, then one of two things is going to happen. They're going to want you to access it from your server to that server directly, which means that you would. I don't know what they're talking about really, because the other servers that I've played with in the past, and I think now, to access them, you have to be signed in on them.
Yeah, this machine.
So there's one scenario. Since we're a web-based service, it may be that they would want us to add us to the CPRS tools menu, like WebLink. So in that scenario, the user would sign on to CPRS first, and would then choose a patient possibly, or maybe go to the tools menu and then select VA PALS, and then the browser window would open up from there. In which case we'd need to use CCOW or something to get from the. We need to be able to get the information from CPRS about what user it is that's signed in. But I mean the access, the authentication and the access would be done to CPRS, and then we'd be accessed from there. That would be a WebLink. That would be like WebLink is inside the VA.
Okay, and I'm not really familiar with that one, so I'm not familiar with it.
Okay, so let me just double check. Say I'm in the VA, I'm a VA employee, I have a PIV card, I sign into my workstation using my PIV card and my 6-digit ID. My desktop comes up and I double click on CPRS. So CPRS also does not prompt for access and verify, it knows that I'm signed in?
Yes. I mean, if you're going to click on CPRS and open CPRS, you've got the menu and you've got the keys that are necessary, and so you're there.
Right. So somehow CPRS.
When you sign in, if you're running from outside in CPRS in a GUI, your key, your card, is your key to the access. Yes.
Right. So somehow information is transmitted either directly or indirectly from whatever infrastructure has been placed in to sign you in with a PIV card and the 6-digit ID into either the CPRS client data or into the Vista server, or perhaps some third location, so that CPRS needs to check that first before it prompts for access and verify.
Well, I mean, Wally and I created the PIV card stuff. Originally, when they were doing the DEA trial at Hines, and then In 2012, DEA made it, instead of being just for Hines, it went national. But to do that, it had to be updated. And unfortunately, I was the one to do that. And Cheryl had actually said, at one point in time toward the end, that because she thought I should retire at the same time she did, if I decided not to, that was fine. Ha ha ha. By the time I had finished with that thing, I put my paperwork in to get out, because to be validated, it had to be audited by outside auditors. And so at Hines, where the tests were done again, first they wanted, for all of it, they wanted flow charts for everything. They wanted an impossible amount of paperwork for everything, stuff we had never done and never, did stuff like that for VA. And then beyond that, the proof positive they wanted was to make sure that the card, because some of these cards have different numbers on them, that we had used the right key on that card for the authentication. And in the end, I was able to ask them, because once we have the person sign in, we create a hash with their card information that they signed in, and it's saved, at least for a while. And then at the end, what I had them do was create, a sign-in for someone. They sent me the hash, and I read them the serial number off their card that was used, and it turned out it was the right one. And at that point in time, I basically collapsed and said, to hell with all of this. And I got out. But that's how it works, is that, it was done for the pharmacy people so that they could do prescribing of narcotic drugs without using paper. Not just narcotics, but category 2, I guess it is. Ones are illegal, and maybe 3. But that software was then turned into basically the sign-on software for Vista. And so when you sign into CPRS, CPRS is contacting the server. The server is the one that asks for your card and looks at it. And then it compares it with the card numbers that you're authenticated with, and that you put into proper codes. And then it's the one that does the authentication. And so it's not really, I haven't looked at the code in CPRS other than, yes, it asks you something, but I'm not even sure CPRS asks you for your sign-on anymore. I don't know. I haven't run the most recent versions. And this has all happened within the last 1 to 2 years. Right. But it's required throughout the VA now. So that's the way they do sign-ons.
Right. So part of what that means for this project is that one can envision 2 different modes by which one signs into the VA PALS application. And in one mode, if we are hanging off the tools menu in CPRS, the facility was put in place 10 to 15 years ago, I believe, in CPRS, such that applications launched from the tool menu can receive information about the currently selected patient and the currently selected user signed on, and possibly some other things, so that they don't have to reprompt for patient or reprompt for access and verify code. And if we can look into that mechanism, then we could create a bridge to receive that data from the CPRS, from being launched from the CPRS tools menu. That's mode 1. In that mode, we would inherit all the work that the Vista server and CPRS had done with the card to establish that you're signed on, and that would be an ideal scenario for us.
Yes.
But there's a second mode, and we need to consider whether we even want to support it. And mode 2 would be, well, what if someone just browses to the URL to invoke our VA PALS application off the server? If they do that, then we're not inheriting any sign-on from the CPRS client. And if we're to behave properly, that would be analogously to the CPRS client. It would mean that whatever the CPRS client is doing at sign-on to figure out that it shouldn't do access and verify code and to figure out who the user is, we would have to do that too.
I'm not sure. They may be using the access verify code in Vista to, to identify for CPRS. All I know is that generally, if I go into the VA and the only way I'm connecting at the moment, of course, is through the outside. Once I come in there, all of my applications open up. Now, I haven't been doing anything inside Vista, but I do know that that's the way that they sign on to Vista. And, it's very similar, I'm sure, to the way that we'd used it for the pharmacy. But the pharmacy, yes, they had originally signed on, and then when they went to do a prescription and it required authentication.
Right.
I think that
that's when they were asked for their card.
This is called two-factor authentication.
Yes, sir.
And in order for it to be two-factor authentication, then you need to have both the access and verify code, which is one factor, and the PIV card. You can't substitute one for the other if it's going to be two-factor.
Well, there's an ID you have to enter, a 6-digit ID, and that takes the place. Theoretically, it would replace the access and verify code, because the idea of two-factor authentication is something you have and something you know. And you have the PIV card and you know the ID.
Okay.
Yeah, the two-factor authentication is actually just knowing that it's there. And, the card is part one, and if you can match it with your code, that's part two.
Yeah, I got you. Okay.
Right, so it's interesting because outside of the VA, when we run CPRS, it's all access and verify code prompts because nobody's using the PIV card and ID infrastructure.
No, but two-factor authentication will come for the outside world. I've written it. And basically, and I haven't submitted it to OSEHRA yet. I just haven't had time. I've been busy with some other stuff. Just a moment. I've got a call.
Well, that's really interesting, I have to say. If you've got a draft of the software that could be used by the outside community, then it could put us in a position where maybe we could alpha test that for you as a way of simulating the VA environment.
Oh, well, the two-factor authentication that I've written uses I created under my own namespace and number space a separate file which points to the kernel file, but it also has some other entries, and one of those is a telephone. If you enter in a cell phone number and you would enter in the provider for that cell phone, then at the time, if that exists, and you do a sign-on, then it will send a message to your cell phone, and it will ask for, I think I asked for a 6-digit, may have been 4-digit code number, and so it will ask them to enter in, it sends them on the cell phone the number, and ask them to enter it in, and if they do, then it signs them in. If it doesn't sign them in. Now, I've tried that with my phone on AT&T and off of a server that it probably had never heard of, and it never came through. But I've also had it tried with other people through 2 other providers, and it worked fine. So AT&T probably says, here, you have to notify me if you're going to send messages like that. I don't know. So that, not everybody in the world is sending them. But I do know that it worked for 2 other phone providers, yes.
And that's the strategy that Apple and Microsoft and others are using when you change your passwords.
Google and such, yes.
Yeah, yeah. That's interesting.
But no, that I've got code that works totally on that. Yes. And then you see, but it depends upon the broker. And one reason I hadn't finished it yet, I mean, in my mind it's not finished because I've about set it up to where I can actually run it. But what I was looking for was also HTTPS connections, such that if one wanted to, and you were using HTTPS on a server, then the broker could talk through that. I've got a connection that will talk to an HTTPS, but I haven't been able to do that on a server that is also running Vista yet, and I'm hoping to get that done before too long. And then that would give you the options of, okay, I want to be able to connect by Telnet, which would be the one you'd use two-factor authentication on. If I connect by SSH, I don't need it. And if I connect by HTTPS, I wouldn't need it. You know, those are secure. You could still use the two-factor authentication to verify those, but what I was looking for was the ability to get rid of the encoding. And if you're doing HTTPS and if you're doing SSH and you know they're secure, which means you have to test by trying to connect with Telnet to the SSH, and if it connects, you don't want to use it. But by using those, then you can get rid of all of the encoding. If you don't get rid of all of the encoding, what I've done is to make the encoding pattern unique to the user. And so it doesn't matter if you've got a VA or OSEHRA or anybody else table, because those tables would then no longer exist. Each user would get his own unique table when he connected. And if you wanted, after so many minutes, you could replace it with a new table. Oh, and when I say table, since the encoding, it would be shipped to you the instant after it's shipped into clear, another table would be sent to you that was encoded. And so that, you know, you basically have secured that encoding as it was transferred. And then from that point on, until you either sign off or you ask for another encoding table, you would use everything, not just to access and verify code, but everything would be encoded.
Right.
All of that exists. The only thing that doesn't exist is the HTTPS.
Well, we would love to work with you on this. And I still have friends at the Puget Sound VA, and one of our friends just retired last year and was a clinical application coordinator, so very familiar with CPRS as of current. So I think I'm going to call her and ask her about your question about if you're in the VA and you're a VA employee and you've signed onto your workstation with a PIV card and a 6-digit ID, are you still prompted for access and verify code, say at the Puget Sound VA? And then we'd know that. We could find out.
I'm thinking about it. They probably are asking for access and verify codes, because that, you see, is the part that allows you to connect then to the server, and it can then identify the user and the PIV card and ask for the PIV card to be connected, and so that they can verify it by that.
Gotcha. So it probably is. That makes sense. That makes sense. Okay. Well, this gives us some direction for how we want to tie the security of VA PALS into this existing framework. Thank you, Joel. So we're now at the second half.
I will make one more comment.
Yeah, please.
And that is that if you know the broker connections, the old style broker and the new style broker use different intro things, so that the first thing they send down when they connect is that. And it identifies whether I'm using old style, which nobody should use anymore, or the new style broker. Well, in the software I've written, there are a bunch of other headers, and each of those indicates how, you know, whether you're using SSH or regular connection, and I want an encoding table, things like that. If they use either one of the original ones, the code I've written then passes it directly over to VA code and says deal with it. And from that point on, it's a regular VA connection.
Right, that's smart. That's
so that I don't have to deal with that, and they don't have to worry about it. But the instant you go and you have a different broker, which has the ability to do these various other connections and to secure them, then in that case, my code handles it all. And it's in that code, and that's the reason for having its own table, its own file, that it can check for whether or not you want to do two-factor authentication.
Right. Right.
I can send you a copy of the code. That's not a problem.
Yes, please. I'd love to see that. Okay. So that brings us through the first half of the conversation today, which was about security, and this has been extremely illuminating. The second half of the conversation we want to have today, what all was on our agenda again?
Well, we might want to skip to the LCAP report.
Okay.
We had broker protocols, and I think we've been figuring out the OSEHRA repository from replies we've gotten from the OSEHRA folks. So.
Yeah. All right.
So,
go ahead, George.
Why don't we do the broker calls now?
Sure.
That makes sense?
Sure. So
why don't you make me presenter, and I'll start off. Or Rick, go ahead.
No, I like where you're going with this.
Okay. So yeah, make me presenter, Linda.
I think you can make yourself presenter.
All right, I'll do it. Okay.
There we go.
Share my screen. Okay. So.
Yep. We can see it.
Okay, great. So the situation we have is that we're trying to configure our software so that we may be running on the same Vista system as all the patients, and in which case we can make a mumps call into the Larry found this RPC, which was made by EHMP for patient lookup, and it gives us back. It's going to allow us to do patient lookup. It returns a lot of the information we need, and it's very fast, and it exists on all the Vista systems, and we can make a direct mumps call into this if we are on the same system as the patients are. But if we're on a separate server where our Vista system, which we're written in Vista, but our Vista system is not the Vista system that has the patients on it. There's another remote Vista system that has the patients on it. Then what we'd like to do is to be able to make a call from mumps to using the RPC broker or using some facility to have the RPC execute at the Vista system that has all the patients on it. So I set up. I have a Vista system with lots of patients on it, and I set up where is it? Well, I'll show you the code in a little while, but I set up a web service on that Vista system, on the Vista system with all the patients on it, that would run that RPC and then return the results. So here is all the patients whose last name begins with CR, right? And you can the way it works, you put a comma and then like an A or something, here's the patients whose last name begins with CR and the first name begins with an A. So this is and it's very fast and gives us a lot of information. It also ought to do the final 5. So let's see if it does. 00415. No, it doesn't. So it does. It does. The code does. The RPC does handle the last 5 of the social number, but I didn't write the web service to do that call properly.
Is that the last 5 or the last 4?
It should be the first initial of the last name followed by the last 4 of the SSN.
It's real interesting because I thought that too. Oh, here's last 4. Right. So it's last 4.
Yeah, so it's the first initial of the last name followed by the last 4 of the SSN.
Right.
That's what they call the BS5.
Okay. All right, good. So that's, but it looks like, oh, look at this. So what is this? Last 5. See, that's what confused me. If the criteria, right now I'm using criteria name. I could try last 5, you think will be 1 letter and then 4 digits?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the standard lookup that most users use in Vista in the VA.
That's what they mean by last 5.
Yeah, it's actually last 4.
But it includes an alphabetic.
Yeah, it turns out that's really discriminating for patients. It works very well.
And do they separate it with a space, or it's just
it just runs right into it.
Oh, how cool is that?
Yeah.
All right, so it should be easy for me to add that to this web service. Anyway, but so this is what's happening is Alexis is writing some JavaScript that'll run on the home page where we're making a patient lookup box, and is going to be using this what do you call it? This web service.
Yeah.
Right. This web service to populate to find to populate the list and make the prompts and things. And so the patient will be able to type in any of those things. So, but what we need is help with having this execute on making a remote call to this RPC running on we'll run it on a separate Vista system. So the things that have come up so far is the mumps to mumps broker,
M2M broker,
M2M broker, right, and the remote data views. And none of us on the call yesterday knew exactly how remote data views worked. So we thought we'd bring it up on today's call and try to pick your brain, Joel, about what options we might have to be able to make a call, from mumps, make a call.
Before Joel comments, it might be a good moment for Larry or Alexis to mention kind of what their progress is today, because they've had some interesting progress.
Hi, this is Larry. So I took a brief look at both the M2M broker and the remote data views. Remote data views is actually called from within CPRS. However, that does mean it's a broker call. And I went in, and there are broker calls in Vista for remote data views. So it may be something we could use. What I thought looked more promising and more fun would be the M2M broker. And so spent a couple of hours with Alexis last night, and with George's permission, I got signed on to one of his systems. And we have one question at least, but we've had some success. So there's a number of APIs in the routine XWB M2MC. I think all of the APIs are in that one routine. Yeah. And the first one sets a connect, and that's so this is a Vista to Vista. And so we did a connect Vista to Vista, And according to the documentation, we should be using port 4800. However, we tried that and it didn't work, but as it turns out,
Yeah, it's M-to-M, right.
Yeah, and so the port that's being used for CPRS, however, in what I call VA PALS, which is really, I haven't seen that, is that true? So anyway, if we did a connect using the Connect API, we did get a connection from using George as the client and VA PALS as the server.
Sweet.
And then I tried setting a context, and that also works in that it returned and said, I didn't have the XWB broker example. So that's as far as we got. But it looks like right now that we can use the, well, it looks like now we might be able to use the M-to-M broker. I need some more time to play, if that's okay,
yeah,
to try each one of them. But you can, there are APIs for getting the division and then pulling information back with a broker call. And it can be a broker call that has information that has to be passed in. So we need we need more time to test it. But right now it looks like we might be able to use that. Now that said, the one thing that we do need is the server, which we're using as VA PALS. When you go in, there has to be a user on that server that you know, and you have to know their access and verify. So this connect call passes the access and verify of the user. So you basically pass the port, the IP address, and the access and verify of the user, and you connect in. And it says, okay, now I'm, Smith. And from then on, that user has to have the broker calls you want. None of that requires any coding on anybody's part, but it might require setting up a client context with the broker calls you want listed under it. Now, again, one more thing, and I'll quit talking, is it looked like in the instructions, if the user on the server side had the @ sign, that just like is normally the case, you wouldn't actually have to have the broker context. And I haven't had a chance to test that yet, but what we did, I think it looks like maybe that's not working, but I may not be using it right. So
well,
I think
that should be true, but it's dangerous. And it should.
And I presume we don't want to do that.
Yes, that it really shouldn't be, especially from someone coming from somewhere else, that they could go with an @ sign. It becomes very dangerous. And one of the things that one of the pieces of software that they did, the crazy group, I'm trying to think, but they never checked for whether or not the connection failed. And if you could get in there and go with a WZ of 0 for some places, then they did. And Ann Arbor, all that stuff they did up there.
Yep.
Those characters were beyond belief.
Meadows.
But in my worst nightmare at times, the M-to-M broker was used basically and was intended for server-server communication, and there have been some updates to it in the not too distant future, but it's been more than a year or two, and it could be used. One of the problems with the other context, the ability to be a visitor, is that yes, the visitor does get identified, but it turned out that frequently, for one reason or another, things that were looked up were not entered correctly, so that when someone went to look at the history of who had looked up this particular user, which for HIPAA reasons you can do that, some of those ended up not being entered correctly. And so that again may have been part of Ann Arbor. But
I was going to say, is the M2M broker using the visitor mechanism?
the visitor mechanism itself, you have to have the RPCs to be able to get there and such, but the Ann Arbor group, I mean, we created it, and I actually created it. And the reason I did was back a number of years ago when the benefits people were having real problems getting things, and they were, and they started to do it. And it was at that time that I wrote the code, and they had a group actually test it out that for the benefits people, so that they could use visitor access. And what they were going to do, and we had them tested, and it was funny because the guy that had signed on, I forget what he'd done, but he followed it up so that he didn't have his access correct, and it rejected him. And so he said, oh, I tried this thing, and after half an hour or so, they called us, and a whole bunch of us listening online, and he said, we tried this, and for me it failed, but it worked for everybody else. And but until that point in time, what they had figured they would do was have a bunch of people sit down and create the same access and verify codes at every site for the people in benefits. And so that's the reason, and that is why, and again, yes, I did it. I'm guilty. But that's why the visitor access exists. And then Ann Arbor got hold of it, and we tried to secure it up because if you've looked at it anywhere recently, it has to have a piece of code entered in with it, and it's a secure piece that somebody knows, but everybody else is not supposed to. So that not everybody could get access to a particular feature. They had to be using the right piece of code, and so that would be a recreating site and some stuff like that. So,
yeah, hopefully we won't be using the visitor technology on this. We should be able to.
It's got some nice features to it, and it did really well for what it was intended to do.
Sure.
To allow one group like benefits to look at what it needed to across everywhere, and yes, it was limited to what they could look at. Ann Arbor did not ask people if they could use any of the RPCs for CPRS and about 5 other applications, and basically just said, oh, we're going to use this to look at anything we want.
Yeah, hopefully we will be a lot more secure than that.
I would hope so.
We'll just
we'll
use direct actual user accounts, and people have to sign in using their actual sign-in.
Yeah. One of the interesting things about that, though, was that Ann Arbor stuff required the user to have CPRS access, and there was one of the sites, and I don't remember its name, which put CPRS on the common menu. And so some janitors and such found out about it, and they were looking at individuals at other sites and even their own site.
But that's water under the bridge.
Yes, we passed
water under the bridge.
That's been a long while back, and yes. So yes, there are benefits, and there are some problems if it's not used correctly. And Ann Arbor certainly set a record for not using stuff correctly.
Right, but we will be using that mechanism here. So let me ask you a quick question. Oakland Field Office, REM. It's not ringing a bell. Who's REM?
Raul? No, M.
Oh,
Raul
yeah.
Mendoza.
Raul Mendoza. So, that's right. Raul wrote this. Yeah.
And yes, and Raul was not the best worker in the world. But like I say, the MDM broker was updated in the last few years. Raul may have been the one to go back and do it. I know Raul had been very good for a long period of time, and then he slacked off for quite a while.
But since we're being recorded.
And yes.
We'll just move right along,
send a copy of it to him. That's okay. And
we'll just move right along. So
I won't mention Mike then. Okay.
Thank you, Joel. So on that note,
yes, I'll shut up.
I think that tells us, George, we've got some promising work going on right now with the M2M broker.
That's great. Thank you so much, Joel. I think that's very Brian, Larry. Great. Larry,
So
great.
let me ask
quickly.
So George and the rest of you, should I continue on with this and see with the codicils that have been mentioned? Just make sure it all works. Okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think it sounds really promising. It'd be so good to get a patient lookup, demo kind of working. It'd be great.
Right. And so that'll put us in a position where the patient lookup and some of the other web services can become modal. And they know whether the data is on their own server or on a different Vista server.
Right.
And they'll just switch back and forth between doing direct subroutine calls versus doing M2M broker RPC calls.
That's very cool.
Okay. The last thing, and then I'm done, is we could also take a look at the remote data views. I'm pretty sure it uses HL7, but it also has broker calls. But for now, maybe I'll pursue the M2M until we're done pursuing that.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Unless you hit a dead end somewhere, why don't we chase the M2M broker down and see how much of this we can get working? And then when that's done, we can then, as a side project, go look at the remote data views to make sure we understand what the other option was.
Yeah, I think it'd be good not to forget the other one because we may get to talking to OI&T and say, oh yeah, no, we disabled all the M2M servers.
Yeah, I'm going to find out about that. The fact that they patched the M2M broker again recently suggests to me that they went back and unbroke it. But I'll read the patch and find out if that's the case.
All right, great.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Great.
So what do you think, George? Should we turn to the report question?
Yeah. It's like we only have 10 minutes, and that's really not enough to cover it. But let's try to do what we can.
Yeah, let's do what we can. So on that discussion, we had some guidance from Ardit about the initial 2 reports, and I just want to confirm while you're on the call that these are that you'd like us to start here. And one would be a follow-up list that the navigator would go to list out the screening participants that need attention or follow-up, and the second would be a report showing the number of patients the navigator has contacted in the past week or month. Kind of a historical progress. Is that right, Ardit? Is that your understanding too for the initial 2 we should begin with?
Yeah, that is my understanding. And I guess just I wanted to double check. We had sent a list of reports or a sample report to Rick Avila. Just wanted to make sure that you guys had that.
I don't know. I'm a little behind on my email right now, so I could have missed it. Don, have you seen that?
What I saw, I saw there was an email with 4 attachments to it. One was a sample of the follow-up report, I think it's called.
Or is it intervention?
And the second was a PDF file of the intervention form, and an HTML of the intervention form. And the fourth thing, I'm not sure. I'll just pull it up now. Yeah, so let me pull that up actually for us to look at.
Oh, that'd be great.
What was the original question?
About the sample reports that Ardit sent, and whether you got that email.
Oh, no, I just have the intervention form.
Okay.
Okay, so this is, can you guys see my screen?
Yeah, looks good.
So this is the follow-up list.
Okay.
You guys see that?
We do.
Yeah, it's been, the names and MRNs have been blanked out in the middle, but we can see the content. And where does this, and this is access off the home page?
Yes, in our system, there's just a box off the home page that says follow-up list.
Right.
Right. So then, when they click it, this is what shows up.
And the action here, this goes to your scheduling app.
Yes.
Is that correct, or what is that?
Right. So the idea that, a coordinator would be looking at this, and as they're looking at it, they may go, want to call the patient or something, and then that would bring them to the scheduling part of the system.
Okay. And then at Phoenix right now, are they using the scheduling app or are they using Vista Scheduling?
I'm not 100% sure, but I don't believe they're using scheduling.
Okay. So actually, would it make sense to navigate from this on our system to navigate from this to the intake form?
Yeah, that seems like it would make the most sense.
Because on the intake form, you can record if you're making a phone call to the patient and what they said, and any activity. If you then use this to scheduling to make to schedule something, you could record it on the intake form that was done. Is that? I'm throwing that out there as a possibility for us. Or we make this form, we're going to have to like generate some test data that with people to be able to test this. But backdate some patients 6 months or something, or backdate them a year, so we have some people who are ready to follow up.
Sure.
So we can do that. So that's follow-up form. There are only 3 attachments. The other was the RB form. Now I noticed here that there's something called a radiation treatment form and a chemotherapy form. Do we have those forms?
Okay, so those, yes, there are those forms, and no, I don't think you have them. Let me talk to Dr. Let me talk to our team here to resolve this. It's a little bit complicated because this is because we're in the middle of switching things, of changing things around, and we haven't fully made those changes yet. So
right.
I think so. Let me check with our team here to see what we want to do about that.
Okay.
I don't want to misspeak. So.
Okay, that's fine. No, let's just pose that as a question for you, Art, to look into.
Okay.
Okay, what do we do about those? That's great. And then I didn't see anything else that jumped out at me as something that we weren't ready to do. How about Don? How about you? This would be a good time to ask any questions on the intervention form. You had them.
I haven't actually looked at it yet.
Okay. All right. So we have this now, and then the other document that we had was a PDF. So it's the same form, but it's just a PDF form. So that's what we got in the this is what you were referring to, right, Artis?
I think Rick Avila has another set of forms another set of reports that our statistician provided that have more of the sort of the kind of bigger picture reports that like the administrative people would be interested in, not necessarily the coordinators. And I'm not sure if those are when or if you would be implementing those. So.
Okay. So let's get that. So we have the follow-up list, and there was another one that Rick Marshall, that you mentioned, was called the reminder or something, or.
I didn't have a name for it, but I had a description. It's the report showing the number of patients the navigator has contacted in the past week or month.
Does that ring a bell, Arjit?
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Was I on mute just now? Did you hear what I said?
Say it again, Rick.
Okay. So I don't have a name for the other one, but it's described as a report showing the number of patients the navigators contacted in the past week or month, which sounds like a really good idea. Ardit, do you recognize that description? Do you have a name for it?
We don't have a name for it. We don't have a name for that.
Okay. It sounds like kind of a progress list.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to see if I can come up with a different name. But, I think that's something that's easy to change later.
And how is that accessed? Is that accessed off the homepage also?
Actually, that report doesn't exist in our system yet directly.
Okay, so you run it separately.
Yeah.
Okay.
Probably right off the database.
Yeah.
But for our purposes, we could hook that onto the homepage too. I would think that the nurse navigator would be very interested in reviewing their own progress. Okay. Well, at this point, we have used up our time, ladies and gentlemen, very profitably. It's been a very interesting discussion for us. We hope it's been interesting for you too. And we look forward to talking with you again next week. Same bat time, same bat station. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Joel.